I've just received a parcel with these fabrics I ordered. Some fabrics just to make myself some tops for the spring and summer, and probably some for my granddaughters as well, although I don't know if it'd be their style. This one here is just a basic t-shirt fabric, and it was something like let me think, 125 a metre. So just an ordinary t-shirt fabric with a slight stretch. This one here, this has a 4-way stretch, and so I'm not sure whether I might use this for making some undies if I do get that far. I think it may be slightly too stretchy for a top, but anyway, we'll see. So the other one I've chosen, slightly heavier, and it's made up with these colours of lilac blue and a pink and a darker pink, which I thought would make quite a nice top. The stretch in this is, I'd say, more across the width than it is on the length, but then that'll be fine, because it's always better to have a little bit more stretch across the body than downwards, to prevent too much stretching that way. I've already put my old cutting mat in place, because I hate to use my purple ones for cutting, because as you can see from this old one, it leaves a lot of marks. So I'm going to be keeping this one while I'm using my rotary cutter. And like I say, I'm just going to sort out my pattern, put it all in place, and I'll come back when I'm ready to cut. All I did for the pattern was I had some of this brown craft paper, and I found a top of mine that I quite liked. So I just drew around it, made a back and a front, and I've used the same pattern now. I've made at least 6 or 7 tops, and it just works out fine. As I say, it's nothing fancy, it's a simple pattern. It's comfortable, and there's plenty of room for adjustments there if you need it wider or longer or even narrower. So yeah, that's all it needs is, as I say, find one of your favourite tops. Dress patterns nowadays are so expensive, I begrudge paying it, especially when it's only something simple like this. So, right, so now I'm going to work on the front part of my top, because I want to make a little decorative adjustment piece on there. So I'll show you that once I've got it ready. So I've gone ahead and cut out the front, and in this case I've added a little bit more to the bottom, just in case I want to make it slightly deeper or longer, and also on the sleeve. Sometimes I like them to be slightly longer, but I like to have that choice, so I've added a bit more on. I can trim it up to make it more even, but now I'm going to go ahead now and prepare the pattern for the back. So I've laid out the fabric, and now in order to try and line up the pattern as best I can with the front, see, I'm going to have to move that up quite a bit, although I'm sure none of the fabric will be wasted, because I'm fine. Yeah, I think I've more or less got that to flow in line. So although I'm using the front pattern I've cut, I will need to go and use the paper pattern because it's slightly different in the neckline. But really I'm just wanting to get the length. So I'm going to cut the length, then I'll put the my pattern in place so I can follow the rest, as I say, for the neckline. Now let me just trim that around. Where's my glasses? Oh, there they are. Right, so now I've got something to work from the bottom of the pattern. The dimensions are more or less the same on back and front. As I say, it's only really the neckline. It's slightly higher at the back. So I'll need to put my other pattern, my front pattern back on just to get the sleeve length. I've got the length of the body length. So I'll just pin this into place a minute. So I've cut the back, and now I've just placed my front piece over the back piece so I can get the same measurements for the sleeve. As I say, I've added a little bit on, so I want them to be the same back and front. May not be perfect at this stage, but I can soon adjust that. There. That's it. Then I've got my two pieces ready. Just one thing I do want to say, if you are planning to make yourself a similar garment, there's no need to be rigid about the where you place your pattern. For instance, if you find that the shaping along the side needs to be adjusted, say for instance you have a smaller bust, you want to bring it in slightly and then out. Also, if you find you want the width even larger, all you need to do is just move your pattern in and then put it onto your fabric, so that gives you the extra fullness there. If you don't want any adjustments, say to the chop half that you do at the bottom, then you can just angle this down, and that way you've got a little bit extra give where you've added that little bit on. But you can adjust it to suit yourself, really. It's just a matter of trying one first. I've had to make several adjustments to this pattern until I was happy with say for instance the way it scoops in there. I didn't want it to be loose, but as I say, you're able to really make the pattern to suit your own measurements. I thought I'd just give you that little snip of information. So I've decided to do a little decorative adjustment panel on each side of this one, so I can draw it in or let it out as depending on how tight a fit I want. So I've allowed roughly 3/8 of an inch for the seam. So if you take your fabric and place it along a straight line, so the center is nice and straight, and then take your ruler and measure down roughly to 12.5 inches, which will allow for the seam allowance, and the placement should work out just fine. Trying to keep this as straight as possible so you've got the equal distance, and then with your pin at 12.5 inches, place that there to mark the position, and then from that point, also trying to keep this as straight as possible, measure down another 5.5 and then pin there, and then do the same on the other side, and then I'll show you there what this is. Something new. I've just decided to try and try this out, see how it's going to work. And so from the initial mark I first made, which was 12.5 inches from the top down to this point here, and then I marked a further 5.5 from there to this point. I then drew another line parallel, measuring exactly the same length, 5.5 inches, and now I need to do the same on this side of the line. So the actual measurement then would be 2 inches across. So that's the next step. So what we need is something like this. This woven tape is brilliant because it's nice and soft, but for one thing it's a little bit wide. Not that that really matters, but the colour, as you can see, just doesn't go. So I just found some scraps of grosgrain, and grosgrain is a substantial ribbon because it's nice and firm, although not quite as soft as the woven tape, but it will do the job. So I found this other grosgrain. That doesn't really go, but that's more the width I would have preferred. I think it's just under 3/4 of an inch. And then I came across a grey one, which does seem to blend a little bit better. So I'm just hoping I'm going to have enough to cut 4 lengths of 6.5 inches, which I'll need 5.5 for the lay down and 1/2 an inch then for turnings on each end. So I'm just going to measure that out a sec. So just for the purpose of the video, I'm going to stick with this grey, and as luck would have it, I just managed to squeeze out 4 lots of 6.5 with just that little slither on the end. So now what I'm going to do is mark out straight lines all the way down at 6.5 inches and then cut those out. So now I've cut my pieces of grosgrain 6.5 inches, and now I've turned down approximately 1/2 an inch on each end, and now they measure around 5.5, well, yeah, 5.5 inches, which is what I wanted. So they're all ready now. So what I've done is roughly mark the centre after turning in the 1/2 inch each end, and then I measured approximately 3/4 of an inch from the edge to the first point, and then from that point I've measured 1 inch. I've marked 1 inch for the eyelets, and then that measurement on the end there is approximately 3/4 of an inch, the same as this end. So the eyelet should be nicely lined up with the same distance either end of the ribbon. And so now I need to find out my eyelets and my eyelet gun, and we'll go on to that next. So what happened, I did notice that I must have had a few different colour eyelets. Some were silver, some were like pewter colour, but none of them really matched. So that put me off. And then what I noticed, when I was trying to make the hole to put the eyelet in, it was also pulling the thread. So I ended up with wavy edges. So that did it for me. And so the next option, because I didn't have any other grosgrain that would have matched, or even any of the woven cord or tape, I should say. So in the end, what I did was I found some scraps of cotton, and scraps was all I had. So I stitched a tube, and I reinforced it with some interlining or interfacing, and then because I had plenty of the gold eyelets, I thought, well, I'll have to stick with those now. So now what I've done is I've put them on. If you need squeezing a little bit tighter, so I'll do that in a sec. But I'll just show you how I achieved that. So using my memory keepers, you have two little cutting circles on there. There's a larger one and a smaller one. So what I did, I lined up the hole, and I don't know if you can see that there's a little hole in the top. Excuse me. There's a little hole in the top which gives me the chance to just see where my crayon mark is. So just give that a little squeeze, and that forms a nice little hole. And then I take one of the little eyelets, pushing it through. Find it easier to do it on the table actually. So now I have all the eyelets in place. I had to bang a few down where they refused to press tight, but that's okay. I'm a little bit happier with the result with these rather than with the ribbon that went all distorted and pulling all the threads. Didn't catch very well at all. So I think this worked a bit better, probably because I'd reinforced it with with a bit of interfacing. Well, so anyway, I've done the best I can there until I get stocked up on some proper webbing. So now the next thing is I'll put these in place on the top before machining them. So I'll be back in a bit. So now I've drawn in my third line at 5.5 inches. Then I've got 3 lines 5.5 inches and 1 inch apart. And I've drawn a line across the bottom and the top to give me a guideline, a placement line for my eyelets. So I'm just going to place those on the line, and then I'll pin those in place. And then I'll go over to my machine and machine them down. So I'll do this on the other side of the top, and I'll be back then when I'm ready to stitch. Just going to move my needle over as far as I can go. That's it. I may need to just go over that a little bit. Didn't quite catch. That's better. Right, so that's the stitching all in place. Now we go back to my desk. So now the tapes with the eyelets are stitched in place. I've just got a wet wipe and I'm just going over the area where I used the marker. And because it dissolves in water, I literally just tap on the area until it disappears. think that's most of it now. The rest won't really show. So now I need to make some laces to threaden through these eyelets. So I've just cut off some strips, which I'm going to sew in half and then turn inside out. I do have a turning tool, which is this one here with a little hook on the end, which you're supposed to push through once it's been stitched and hook on. But more often than not, I find the hook comes undone halfway through. So what I tend to do now is this. I just have a little piece of ribbon, narrow ribbon or string or anything narrow. And so I just insert that inside and then I stitch along the seam, incorporating the ribbon all the way to the bottom, and then I'll come back and show you what I do then. So I'm just taking this over to my machine now, and I'll stitch. I only really want the lace to be about less than ½ an inch, so even if I stitch a wider seam I can soon trim it down. So I'm going to do that and then I'll be back. I finished stitching the lace to go through the eyelets. I've inserted a piece of ribbon, stitching it there to secure it in place, and that runs all the way to the bottom. You need to be mindful not to trap the ribbon inside your seam. I've used a stretch stitch on my machine. It's what the stitch that looks like the lightning bolt, not the zigzag stitch. This one seems to be better for stretchy fabric, so I'll just carry on now and finish trimming off the excess.